Hello, my name is Rebecca Ryan. I'm the futurist and economist who was tasked with helping Asheville and Buncombe County through the Asheville Greater process, hence the logo. If you missed the live event that we had in September 2019, this video will get you up to speed on what Asheville Greater is, how many thousands of people were involved in the process, and what the 4 strategies are that we must get right to ensure that our kids and grandkids inherit a region that they can be proud of. Let's walk through it. So I want to start by greeting you with a very warm hello. As many of you know, this has become a very personal project for me. I've got family that lives in the Asheville MSA, and over the course of the 12 months that we worked together, I was very privileged to get to know many of you in dozens of organizations across the community. So I'm greeting you with this very warm hello, but at the live event, when we rolled out Asheville Greater, I reminded people that this work will require all of us. We need each other, but we also have each other. And as you think about the role you want to play in moving this initiative forward, I encourage you, you may be watching this kind of in the confines and isolation of your own office, on your own phone. You may not be watching this with other people, but I want to assure you that thousands of us have gathered around this project, this initiative, and care about the results of this moving forward. So you have each other and you need each other. So what's on tap for the presentation? Well, as I mentioned, I want to give you a little context about what Asheville Greater is, who was involved, what the key topics were, and then the 4 strategies we have to get right. I also want to share with you some tensions that I expect you're going to run into in the coming years and months as this project continues to gain traction and gain partners. So if we go back to September 2018, when the project launched, let me minimize my screen here. One of the things that we can think about is how many of these seats were open. You know, we had a lot of leaders in key positions in transition around the community. And in the last year, we have filled every one of these positions, right? From Buncombe County to the City of Asheville to the Dogwood Health Trust to several of our private sector partners and educational leaders. And if you think about these seats being empty and now being full, this represents a humongous opportunity for this region. You know, I have visions of all of these leaders working together, doing their part to pull this vision into the future. And if you total up the budgets or the financial impact that these organizations make in our region, it's over $4 billion of impact. So we've got real opportunity here with the change in leadership. We've got a real opportunity because of how many members of the community spoke about what they want for Asheville's future. So where do we go from here? Well, you can't talk about the future of this region without talking about growth. The data tells us that by 2040, we will add 2 entire Asheville's, 2 additional cities, right? Almost 150,000 people to the community. And growth can be a great blessing, right? Because it tends to create prosperity that can be a bit more widely shared. But growth can also be difficult because growth can allow you to sort of paper over some of the deeper systemic issues in the community. So what we know is that for many of us, we feel growth like breathing heavily on our necks, and we want to do something about this. And this is one of the other primary drivers for Asheville Greater. We saw that there was a lot of transition in leadership. We also could feel the growing pains in our community. And, you know, we knew something needed to be done, but the big question was, what do we want to grow into? Who and what does this region want to be when it is a metro center of 500,000 people, right? We know that these things will be happening by 2040, a generation from now. So what do we want to leave to our kids and to our grandkids? And what are the things that we can do now to set the table for a future that benefits all? So those were some of the questions at the heart of Asheville Greater. You know, How can we best manage this change in leadership, this transition in leadership? What if we all harnessed our resources towards a shared future, a shared vision of the future? And what do we want to be? You know, in the course of my work in your community, I heard two memorable metaphors about Asheville and its future. One was this, you know, that this is a community in search of a vision. We've kind of got the tiger by the tail here, but we're not sure what we want to grow into. And the second metaphor was this one. Someone said to me, you know, this community is like an indie rock band that had a hit single, and now it's like blowing up all over the world. Everyone wants a piece of this. We're touring like crazy, but we have no idea how to manage our money, manage the band, manage the future, manage a record label. So taking a beat, right? Taking this last several months and thinking, what do we want to grow into? It's a very valuable exercise. And my job as your resident futurist and as your economist in residence was to bring the tools of foresight to bear on this question. And this is worth repeating for those of you who have heard it before. The tools that we use to answer this question, what do we want to grow into, are very different than traditional planning tools. Traditional strategic planning tends to look at what we've always done. It looks to the past and says, well, what have we done in the past? And how can we do it a little bit better, faster, or cheaper? Strategic foresight takes a different viewpoint. It looks to the future. And it says what's coming towards us and how can we be most, you know, on our toes, most anticipatory, most ready for whatever is coming so that we can be well positioned. And that's what we did in this process. We asked what's coming, who do we want to be when we grow up, and what are our best chances to get there? So strategic foresight, that is the professional process that we use. It's a 6-step process. We started in September of 2018. We wrapped it up in September of 2019, and now it's time to take action. So when we started last September, we gathered everybody at the Center for Craft, in the basement of the Center for Craft, and I loved these tenets that were posted on the pillars in that basement. Everyone is creative, right? There's power of community. We want you to give a damn, and having these face-to-face connections matter. And what we did was we took a group of 80 folks who represented a cross-section in the community, and we asked them to volunteer 6 hours of their time to help us sort through trends. And at the end of the day, we had a wall of trends that these teams said were high impact and very high certainty, and then they spread them across a 0 to 10. You can kind of see on this slide the 1, 2, 3, 4. They spread them across 0 to 10. How ready are we for these trends? And what we realized is that there's a lot coming towards Asheville and Buncombe County and the Asheville area, but we're not ready for many of these trends. And it's not clear that these trends belong to any one organization. These trends belong to all of us. We're going to need to take a shared look at these trends and share some ownership around these trends. But we didn't stop there. We then turned these trends over to the community, and we had over 1,100 people give over 3,200 hours, that's a year and a half's worth of time, to help us sort the trends that folks felt were most important. And these were the top 6 trends that emerged from this broad group of survey respondents. Now, not everybody gave their demographic information. It was optional for people to plug in their zip codes. But what you can see is like the darker purple, the more responses were given, and the lighter, the blues and the greens, the fewer responses were given. And these are the issues that they said mattered the most. These are the top 6 trends. So number 1, everybody's talking about it. Residents getting priced out of housing, right? Number 2, the fact that the middle class feels like it's shrinking. 3, population is growing, right? 4, is employment growing overall? Whom is it benefiting? Number 5, we seem to have a public sector budget gap, right? Number 6, jobs are growing, especially in selected areas. So these are the top 6 things that were on people's minds. And as your resident futurist, I take a look at these, and these are pocketbook issues, right? Can I afford housing? Is the middle class shrinking or growing? What is population growth doing to things like my commute time, to the cost of housing? Is it making childcare more or less available? Growth in employment, changes in budget, and growth in jobs. So as a futurist, one of my jobs is to look at these trends and start to get down to the very root issues, the core issues. So part one was we had 1,100 people weigh in on these trends. But then part two was this. We started to look at alternative futures for the Asheville area. This is another foresight tool, a futuring tool. It is to look at plausible future scenarios, because the future of our region isn't singular, right? We can't know exactly what the future of our region is because it depends. Some of it depends on external factors. If we have another recession, how policies that are done at the State House in Raleigh or federal policies will impact us. But some of it is how we respond to the changes coming our way. So what we did was we gathered folks together and we ran 15 possible futures for the region. So we looked at, here was one scenario that was talked about, you can read it here, Asheville's indomitable spirit, and what was happening to one single person throughout the next decade, 2 decades in Asheville. And we ran, again, 15 of these possible scenarios. And then what we looked for were crossover issues, right? Regardless of which of these 15 scenarios comes true, and none of them will come perfectly true, but doing these scenarios gives us a chance to rehearse possible futures. Some futures that might be rosy and sunny, and some futures that might be dismal and dark. And I don't have time today to talk you through all 15 of the scenarios, but I do want to give you 2 plausible futures. The first one is this. It's a watch and wait future. What happens if we watch and wait? If those 6 trends that you saw a couple screens ago just continues to grow and impact the region, and we don't do anything about it, we're not proactive, we just kind of say, well, I guess growth is good, let's keep going. What we know for sure is that the Asheville area and Buncombe County will become older, whiter, and richer. We know that, right? If present trends continue. We know that you will continue to grow and that housing will continue to feel out of reach for many people. We know that affordable housing means different things to different people, and 4 groups in particular will be affected by the lack of affordable housing if we watch and wait. The first group are empty nesters, right? So empty nesters who say, I want to downsize. They want to sell their homes, but they want to find something smaller, but they can't find anything affordable. The second group that is impacted by this are people who are becoming elderly and moving on to a fixed income. They might want to move into assisted living, but even that is feeling out of reach if you're a pensioner on a fixed income. The third group who defines affordable housing as a significant issue are young families. Families who say, we just had our second child, we're looking for a starter home. We can't seem to find that in Buncombe County, so we're going to move, right, someplace where it's cheaper. And that's okay, but what we know is that will create more traffic, right, as people have to commute longer distances to get to daycare and then get to work. So affordable housing for young families. And then finally, affordable housing for those who can least afford it, right? Those who have to have housing assistance or who are on some sort of an assistance to meet their monthly requirements. So affordable housing will continue to be an issue, and it's going to affect all 4 of those groups. What else? If we watch and wait, if we, as the screen suggests, kind of watch the grass grow, what else can we expect? We can expect more difficult commute times, right? We can expect that very much in the same way that Houston has grown in kind of a hodgepodge way, that's how development will happen in our 3-county, 4-county, 5-county regional area, right? If we watch and wait and present trends continue, we can expect that cities and counties are going to have to pass emergency budgets because the budget gaps are going to grow. We can expect that we will continue to lose our African American population, and many people will have difficulty getting their foot on the first rung of the economic ladder. If present trends continue, we can expect that our public schools will continue to do well by some students and do poorly for other students, especially our Black and brown students. That's a watch and wait scenario. And you play that forward, and by 2040, it starts to feel pretty dismal. It starts to feel pretty bleak. But that is not an assured future. Through the Asheville Greater process, we also looked at aspirational futures. And here's what could happen if the right people with the right resources and the right mobilization and a shared vision works together. We know that regionally we can start to create strong leadership collaboratives so that folks in Transylvania County and Henderson, throughout our region, started thinking together about how we can all benefit from the growth in Asheville and Buncombe County. We know that that's possible, and we know that it's necessary, right? We also know that there's a way that we can talk about how we protect the environment regionally, how we use our land regionally, so that if employers want to come here, together we can say, we've got space for you. It might not be in Buncombe County, it might be in an adjacent county, right? We know that we could be doing development in a way that we could grow up, not just out, but up. We know that these things are possible. We know that there is a way to help every resident get their foot on one rung of that economic ladder and climb as high as their gifts and capacity will allow. We know that there's a way to raise our educational levels in our region. We know there's a way to raise standards of living, right? We know that there's a way that the urban and rural divide can actually be a strength, right? We know that these and many other things are possible, but we have to get several things right for that to be true for our kids and for our grandkids. So what must we get right? We think it comes down to 4 things, right? These are 4 things that if you think about a domino cascading, right? We know that one domino can knock down a next domino that is 1.5 times larger. So it's possible with a 5mm domino, you can Google it, right? With a 5mm domino, we can, after I think it's 17 or 19 dominoes, we can knock over a 100-pound domino that is multiples the size of that 5mm domino. So these 4 strategies are the first dominoes that have to fall, because they will enable the biggest, brightest, fullest potential for Asheville to truly become greater by 2040. What are those 4 things? Well, we're going to start with leadership, right? Leadership matters. I mentioned a moment ago that we envision all the new leaders and the established leaders coming around a shared vision for Asheville's future. And if they could do that, if our leaders could say, hey, there's one thing out of this Asheville Greater plan that I can put in my strategic plan, maybe 2 things, maybe 3, right? We know that that first domino could start to fall, but it starts with our leaders having a shared vision of what the future looks like. And these 4 strategies in the Asheville Greater plan begin that process. So to ask our leaders at the city, at the county level, among our nonprofit organizations and our leading institutions, our for-profit organizations, which one of these 4 strategies do you want to put into your plan? We know that has to happen. The second thing we know we've got to get right is we have to start bringing the next generation to the table. We have to start leading in an intergenerational way. And you're starting to see some of that happen. Some of our newest leaders in Asheville and Buncombe County are younger leaders, right? We need to continue to bring that voice into the conversation, not just because it's the right thing to do and it diversifies the conversation, but think about this. You know, if we're trying to build a region that's going to thrive in 2040, it's the right thing to have leaders who will be at these tables in 2040 part of this conversation. The third thing we know is moving forward, as the region goes, so goes Asheville. And as Asheville goes, so goes the region. We are interdependent. We might not want to admit it, but we are. So we've got to start to build some regional leadership scaffolding. So how do our chambers across the region work together? How do our city and county managers across the region working together? How do our electeds across the region work together? Can we build, sort of a group of government relations folks who can come together in Western North Carolina and go to Raleigh as a single region, as a voice for the region? Because we've got to share the benefits and the challenges of this growth together. And then finally, when it comes to leadership, how do we balance the scorecard, right? Those of you who are familiar with balanced scorecard from the 1980s know that we talked about people, people, planet, and profit, that those three things have to be balanced. We're talking about it in slightly different terms. We're talking about people, place, and prosperity. But how do we take care of all of our people with the decisions we make? And all means all, right? How do we make decisions that balance those, competing interests, whatever the case is? So all people. How do we take care of our place, right? Our air and water quality, our natural resources, our land, our farmland, right? So how do we take good care of our place? And then how do we think about prosperity? Whether that is about educational equity, or whether it is about, how we think about what's fair in terms of resource development and sharing resources. We've got to keep those three things in mind and in balance. So as a leader, right, maybe you feel like you are a leader, right? What's your role in this? Second, how do we think about grass tops and grassroots within this leadership conversation? Grass tops are what we think of as traditional leadership, people with positional authority. They can drive top-down change, and they've got the money or influence to make a difference. But there's a second kind of leadership, grassroots leadership. These are folks who have relational influence, right? They might not have money or authority. They might not have capital L leadership where they've got a title like CEO or executive director, but in fact, they are very well networked. And if they can mobilize a community, things can start to happen. And their benefits aren't necessarily institutional power or money, but they've got the ability to be very agile and to turn on a dime. And we need both kinds of leadership. And I want to show you something from the survey. When we ask this question, right, how much impact do you feel you have on the Asheville area's future? I was very surprised by the folks in the bottom two rows. Over half of the people who responded to this survey said, I have none at all or only a little. There's a real opportunity for us to tap into the amazing skills, the amazing networks, and the amazing talents of people who at this point don't feel like they have impact or can have influence on our region. So we need a grassroots strategy, not just a grass top strategy. That's where all of us generally look, okay, CEOs, what can you do to make our lives better? But in the future, all communities are going to have a true grassroots level of leadership as well. So there's a real opportunity for here. This is latent talent. To me, I look at a chart like this and I think this is latent talent. Okay. Second thing that we've got to get right. Growing up is a double entendre here. I'm talking about growing up from the perspective of phases of maturation, but I'm also talking about growing up as, density. So let me start with the growing up from a maturation perspective first. A mentor of mine told me once, he's like, communities go through these three stages and it can happen again and again and again. And you're definitely feeling this because of your population growth. He said there are three stages. Start up, you start to really grow. Throw up, we know what that feels like, and grow up, where we really start to grow into the kind of region that we feel we have the potential to be. So when I think about, your startup, how tourism has just caused this region to explode and how now you're on the list of all the best places to visit, but you're also on the list of the best places to live. You've gone through startup and you are in sort of the convulsing throw up stage, right? Where the budgets are starting to feel inadequate and the resource needs are outstripping like the availability of supply. So you're going through some of those pieces. And what this plan, I hope, will help do is bring you into grow up. Like, how can we be the region we think we can be? We know it starts with leadership, but we also have to start to grow up. We have to, be the mature community that, our kids and grandkids are looking for us to be, so that they can inherit a place worth inheriting. So that's one definition of growing up. But then the other definition is kind of the growing up physically, the hardscape, the infrastructure. So this gets at things like housing density for sure. But it's like, how are we going to use our land, right? So you see land, transportation, housing, and resources here. This is one of the few communities I've worked in where your topography is truly a constraint. Some people talk about being constrained by their mountains or by their oceans or by their water. You truly have a series of constraints. So how do we use that to our best benefit? And how do we grow up in how we think about using that land, how we think about housing, right? The other two places where we've got to really kind of grow up is how we think about transportation and how we think about our resources. And our resources is both the funnel in, how we fund things, but how we also spend our resources in a way that we can get the best possible bang for the buck, make the most impact. Third area of focus is around economic mobility and shared prosperity. I've been in the economics game. I've got a degree in economics and have been looking at how this field has been changing for years and years. And one of the most exciting things that I am seeing happen is this notion of economic mobility. So Raj Chetty out of Harvard talks about economic mobility, and his argument, backed by research, is that the number one factor that determines whether a kid will make it out of poverty or will make it in their life is who their neighbors are. And this kind of flips on its head what we know about how you grow the pie. We used to think, well, if we just attract jobs, right, that'll grow the prosperity. Or if we can attract talent from other places, like let's steal talent from Charlotte, that'll do it. That is how we used to think about growing the economy. But what Chetty is showing is that for our residents, the number one factor is who they grow up around. So this is why when we talk about block by block, right, we have to take almost a block by block approach to thinking about who's in our community now and who surrounds those people in that community. So we're using some best practices here as we plot out the 2040 vision for Asheville Greater, right? And we're looking at how can we do this more nuanced and leading indicator block by block approach so that we truly do grow our pie. We don't just cut our pie. And then finally, we know that those first years for a child make all the difference, right? Oklahoma is one of the first states that said pre-K is going to be a requirement for all kids. And while it required a big investment on the front end, what they're finding is that on the back end, there's huge payoff and huge cost savings. So when we talk about shared prosperity and true economic mobility, there are some investments that we can make that have long tail payoff, right? So we've got to be really thoughtful, again, about how we position our resources, previous slide, right? And also how we spend our resources. Fourth thing we've got to get right is the notion of belonging. Belonging. And here, I want to talk for a moment to white people, right? We in the majority population, white people, I think we're doing our best. I'm going to give us all the benefit of the doubt, right? We know about the importance of diversity, and we've also talked now about inclusion, right? D&I initiatives, diversity and inclusion initiatives. But again, the most recent research shows that this is inadequate, right? People certainly don't want to be tolerated, and being included is nice, but it still indicates that you're outside the circle of concern, as Dr. John Powell would say. So what we're going for here is a place where people feel that they belong. And we know that our population of African Americans, for example, is going down. Do they feel that they belong? How can we help them feel that they belong? That ours is truly a region that is for all people. Right? Now let's talk a little bit about our retirees. You heard me say that if present trends continue, if we watch and wait and we do nothing, we will become older, we will become whiter, and we will become richer. That is neither all good nor all bad, but what most people have said is that's not the kind of region we want to be. Even retirees say, I don't want to feel like I moved to a retirement community. They want to feel that they're part of a community with little people and older people and teenagers and baby boomers and empty nesters, and the whole life stage continuum should be present for people to feel vivified. Our retirees are telling us this. And one of the things that I sense in my work in Asheville and in Buncombe County, helping this region think about its future, is our retirees are an untapped resource. You know, I think about where philanthropic dollars go, and very often retirees send their philanthropic dollars back to their first home, not to their retirement home. You know, and then I think about things like helping all children read at grade level by 3rd grade. And I think about other communities where I've worked. Greater Lafayette, Indiana comes to mind, where they did a huge initiative to make sure that every 3rd grade classroom had volunteers who came in every week and read to the 3rd graders as a way to get them reading at grade level. And I think about the retirement community in Asheville and Buncombe County and the surrounding counties increasingly. And is there an opportunity for us to match retirees who want to plug into the community and feel like this community belongs to them too, to make a really positive impact for, you know, for kids across the community? I feel like that's a real opportunity for us. So we've got to think about our retirees as a resource, as a valued part of our community, that they belong here. They're not just visitors, right? Who are having second homes here, but how can we help them belong? And then finally, young families. You know, Asheville has got a rockin' brand, you know, best place to visit, best place to live, on all kinds of lists. But when you are a parent with kids in grade school, the #1 brand builder in your community is your schools. It's your schools. So how we think about our brand in that way is going to be very, very important. Now, I want you to think back over those 4 areas, right? Leadership matters, growing up, economic mobility and shared prosperity, and being a place where all people feel that they belong. I bet that in the work that you do every day, you can see a piece of this for yourself. And when we were all together for the kickoff event in September, I pointed out that I asked if you have something that you feel, you know, matters, that you can really bite into, hold up your card, because there's a card with a terrific image of, you know, a paint by numbers image of the community in 2040. And boy, it was great to see every hand, I think almost every hand went up and held this side of the card forward. So we had a beautiful visual of all these paint by numbers signs going up. But the road's not going to be short, and it won't have silver bullets. So as your resident futurist, as an economist who's had the pleasure of working with you, I can predict that there are going to be some tensions that you're going to feel and that you're going to have to navigate. So let me share what some of those are so that when they come, you don't feel blown back or put back on your back leg, but you can really feel that this is expected and you've got the ability to navigate through. Here they are. The first one is that change happens at different paces. Stuart Brand, the originator of the Whole Earth Catalog, the founder of the Long Now Foundation, he came up with this notion of pace layering. Fashion changes the fastest, right? Fashion is go, go, go. It goes quickly, you know, from one season to the next. This shirt is already out of date, right? But beneath that, commerce, right? The way that you and I operate our businesses today, or the way you connect with your kids or your grandkids today, it's all different than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Things can change pretty quickly. Beneath that infrastructure, you can read it here: governance, culture, and then finally nature. One of the things that is intentional about Asheville Greater, this 2040 vision for the community, is that we're getting underneath commerce, we're getting to infrastructure, we're getting to governance, we're getting to how we lead together. That's cultural, right? So these things are going to take some time, and that's okay. That's why you do a long range future, so that you give yourself what do we want to say? So that you give yourself the runway so that you can take off and you can fly. Here's another tension, right? Very often we want to focus on the hardware. I'm so sorry. I know I'm not the only person that this happens to, but let me just turn my phone off here. There's hardware and there's software in a community, and very often, especially public sector budgets, are focused on hardware, right? Where are we going to put streets? How are we going to rezone? It's the infrastructure of things, the built environment, right? But as important to the future of this region is the software, the social connections that we put people together with, you know, and how we make our investments in people. And we're going to continually have to toggle between that. I alluded to it when I talked about the triple bottom line in Leadership Matters. It's about people, it's about place, and it's about a sense of shared prosperity. So the hardware and the software. Too often we get caught up with the hardware. I think about even when we do capital campaigns for buildings, it's like, who wants to buy a brick for our new building? But the software investments that we make in this region are going to be as important. So I think about, you know, hats off to Buncombe County for investing in pre-K education and investing in things like more affordable childcare. These things are critically important. They're investments in software. Another tension that you can expect is this one, right? Are you going to stay in your comfort zone? Are you going to get out on your growth edge? Remember when I talked about startup, throw up, grow up, right? Grow up is where that growth edge really starts to feel sharp. So it's everyone's natural inclination to work with the people they know well, you know, to work on processes that they're familiar with. But also what that does is it keeps you at a sort of a static level. I'm encouraging you to turn pro, right? To grow as big into the potential that you truly can. And that's going to require different partnerships. You're going to be working with different people. I want to encourage you to bring in those best practices from other places. For example, when I talked about economic prosperity and the economic mobility work that Raj Chetty has done, did you know that Charlotte Mecklenburg is working on this? They're partnering with Chetty already to think about economic mobility in a new and different way. Let's bring those folks in from Charlotte. Let's talk with them about what's working. Let's not fall into the trap of like, it has to be invented here for it to work here. Are we willing to make a professional commitment to true best practice? Another tension I'm anticipating is wanting to keep things really simple and sort of silver bullet oriented, when in fact, this kind of work is very interconnected. And it's like you pull one string and the whole fabric comes along with it. There's a level of interconnection, even to these 4 strategies, that is not simple and that is complex. And so the word, you know, that is like on my heart for you guys is steadfastness. How can you keep pecking away at leadership, at economic mobility, at being a place where all belong, you know, at being a place where truly you're committed to growing up That's not a 1-year plan. That's not a 5-year plan. We're talking about a 2040 vision. And do we have what it takes to stay at the task? I want to tell you a quick story. I was doing a project in Indiana, and in these public sessions, this older woman, whose name I think was Barbara, she just continued to come, and she would sit in the back and she wouldn't say much. And I didn't know who she was until one of the project sponsors from one of the leading universities came up to me. He said, have you met Barbara yet? And I said, no, I haven't. Like, I've seen her at these meetings, but I don't know who she is. And he said, you know, she's the one who got the railroad moved. And I thought, what? He said, yeah, there used to be a railroad that cut right through the middle of town, and it divided north from south, and it was haves and have-nots. It was a physical barrier, but it was a social barrier. It was an economic barrier. And she worked for almost 20 years, but she got that railroad moved out of the center of town. And man, I've got the chills thinking about it. And here Barbara was going through, attending these meetings for another 20-year visioning process, right? After she had worked so hard over the course of 20 years to do something that really mattered. But I think of her a lot when I think of the level of commitment, the level of steadfastness, the lack of accepting no or accepting the status quo. She's my model of steadfastness, and she's a hero. She's a hero to that community. They should name a leadership award after that woman for her stick-to-itiveness and what she did to really sew that community back together in a very real and physical way. Now, maybe you don't feel like these 4 huge strategies, kind of the big 4 strategies, are things that you can bite into. But what I would suggest is to start where you are, right? And at the beginning of this project, we agreed to these first principles, that these were the things that our initiatives would stand for, that our projects would stand for, that our leaders would stand for. You can read them here. I don't need to read them for you. But the beauty of first principles is this. Think of these as bedrock, right? And if we can build any initiative, if we can build any project on these principles and line them up towards a 2040 vision, we're going to be okay. We are going to be okay. So when in doubt, go back to these first principles. You're going to be in good standing if you kind of build with these principles in mind. So it starts here. It starts here. And some of you might be saying, well, crap, Rebecca, what's the first thing I can do, right? What's one thing I can do? I'm going to give you 3 things that you can think about. The first one is this. I would ask you to catch people doing things right, especially your institutional leaders, your capital L leaders, the ones who have CEO or president in their title. So if you see a Deborah Campbell encouraging the city council to balance the triple bottom line, send her a note. If you see a Kit Kramer stepping out around economic mobility and inclusion, you know, stepping beyond the typical chamber party line, send her a note. If you see a county commissioner standing up for something in these 4 strategic areas, let them know that you're watching them and you see them and you're grateful for them. Because leadership is lonely, and we always as leaders hear about when we're letting others down. Boy, if we could start to catch our leaders doing things right, working across the aisle, working collaboratively across the region, that helps our leaders know that we've got their back, right? And we're watching them, and we want to catch them doing things right. Second thing I would ask is for you to notice your own growth edge. You know, where could you push yourself just a little bit more? And it would not only benefit the future of this region, but it would also benefit you, right? So I'm going to ask you to notice your own growth edge and to push into that. And then finally, I would ask you to think about one thing that you would commit to. At the end of my most recent book, Regeneration, I was trying to bring it all to like a clean close for the reader, you know, and how could I help the reader, um, you know, come to terms with this big idea that I had put out in the book, but to see themselves in the future. And I remember writing, you know, you're only one, but you are one. You know, I mean, you cannot do everything, nor can I, but we can do something. And what we can do, we must do. So, what is the one thing that you can do? And if you're thinking about your kids and your grandkids, that they would expect you to do, to plant a seed that is going to make an even greater region. You know, at the time that we launched Asheville Greater in September 2019, I counted it up, and we had 7,671 days until the same date in 2040. But it starts with a single day, and it starts with a single action, right? That's how it starts. And I challenge you, what's the one thing you're going to do to make Asheville greater?